Hi, my name is Mariana Arroyo, and I am presenting today about the gut microbiota in mood disorders. Moreover, how does mood affect gut health? This is for the class Psychology 325, Physiological Psychology. So, mood has been linked to other physiological aspects of the body. For example, the symptoms of depression are often physical, such as fatigue and weight loss, such that mental health is not limited to affecting cognitive processes, but it's also known to affect physiological characteristics. One major part of the body that remains relatively new to research is this um, microbial ecosystem in the gut and its role in relation to the rest of the body. Multiple research does suggest that physiological changes may and can cause mood disorders. Mood disorders are a great problem in the population and affect a lot of people, about 10% of the population to be exact. Causes of mood disorders may be physiological, as I said. So these can include genetic and environmental factors that contribute to mood disorders, such as there's also chronic non-infectious inflammation, oxidative stress, neurotransmitter imbalance, insufficient signaling by neurotrophic factors, and neuroendocrine abnormalities. So this really suggests that there's already a known connection between physiological changes and mood disorders. But until now, little was known about the microgut biome and its relationship with mood disorders, really. So, the question that I want to explore is, do mood disorders cause physiological changes in the gut microbiome? Commensal microbiota inhabits various parts of the body, and these include the skin, nose, oral cavity, stomach, and intestines. So, a quick introduction to the gut microbiome in humans. It contains 10 to 100 trillion microbes. This is 10 times more than the total number of human cells, which I think is pretty impressive. The predominant bacterial phyla in the human gastrointestinal tract are the following, which I know I'm going to pronounce wrong, but I'll give it a try. These are the Firmicutes, Bacteroidetes, Proteobacteria, Actinobacteria, Fusobacteria, and Cyanobacteria. These all play an important role in the balance of the human gut microbiome. And they can be influenced by multiple factors, and this is genetic basis, environment, diet, antibiotics, probiotics, and prebiotics. Furthermore, some researchers suggest that the human microbiota is the second genome, which contains 100 times the number of genes of the human genome. So, this is really important because it suggests how essential the gut ecosystem is to maintaining human health and can really be classified as a metabolic system and protective structural and historical functions that it serves. The microbiota changes dynamically during individual growth, which isn't surprising considering how much the human body changes as we grow. The gut microbiome dysbiosis is associated with many systematic disorders. These can include the functional bowel disorder, inflammatory disease, atherosclerosis, metabolic disease, and neuropsychiatric disorders. Although there are many intestinal and digestive complications, I'm going to be focusing on stomach ulcers, which are one of the more prevalent risk factors that lead to stomach cancer. As mentioned in the lecture about stress, it has been noted that it can cause a lot of problems, especially prolonged stress. However, one of the consequences of prolonged stress was peptic ulcers or stomach ulcers, and these are open sores that develop on the inside lining of the stomach and upper portion of the small intestine. So, there are two kinds of ulcers, and these are gastric ulcers that occur on the inside and duodenal ulcers that occur on the inside upper portion of the small intestine, as I mentioned. And there are a variety of symptoms that come with this, such as a burning stomach pain, feeling of fullness, bloating and belching, um, fatty food intolerance, heartburn, nausea, but the most common symptom of peptic ulcer is stomach pain. The causes for stomach ulcers was relatively unresearched before the 21st century, but in 2005, the Nobel Prize was awarded to Barry Marshall and Robin Warren for the discovery of H. pylori's role in ulcers and its development. The two most common causes of ulcers are H. pylori, a bacterial infection, and medication, most commonly aspirin and other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medicines, um, and iron tablets. So these anti-inflammatory medicines are, for example, Advil and Tylenol. Before the 18th or before the 21st century and since the 1800s, people thought that stress was the culprit for stomach ulcers. I can't talk. And people were given medications for psychological stress, such as antidepressants and tranquilizers. But there's just simply not enough evidence. However, it does make the symptoms worse, which has been backed up by research. So the biggest question was whether or not stress causing this digestion problem was a myth. And really, a lot of people do consider it a myth. And this is because the stomach that produces a layer of mucosal defense. And this is made up of mucus, bicarbonate, phospholipids to protect its lining against the constant fight between digestive enzymes, microbes, stomach acid, bile, and proteins, which is really this ecosystem that I was talking about earlier. And this protective lining gets put at risk by H. pylori, so that is really why stress causing ulcers is considered a myth, since it's not the sole cause of the development of ulcers. So H. pylori was thought to be a crazy idea because before 2005, when Marshall and Warren were awarded the Nobel Prize for this discovery, it was thought that the stomach was essentially sterile because it didn't have bacteria or anything, which now we know it's not true, but this was thought because the stomach has an extreme acidic environment under which bacteria could not possibly survive. However, H. pylori produces this enzyme called urease, and it protects it against this acidic environment. And from there, H. pylori settles in. So H. pylori produces cytotoxin-associated gene A, or CAG-A, which interferes with the attachment between epithelial cells that normally produce this mucosal defense lining that I was talking about earlier, and induces inflammatory immune response, which we know as gastritis. Some strains of H. pylori cause chronic infections, and these are associated with the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue called mouth lymphoma, which involves B cells. It is also associated with adenocarcinoma, which involves gastric gland cells. Additionally, another strain produces exotoxin, vacuolating cytotoxin A. That's a long name, or simply called VAC-A. Now, these toxins cause the epithelial cells to die, and it exposes the underlying layers of lining of the stomach, and eventually leads to the holes in the stomach lining that we refer to as stomach ulcers. Now, the question that we're interested in is, how does a psychological stress or mood affect this? Since now we know stress doesn't actually cause stomach ulcers. So one of the things that makes ulcer symptoms worse is an increase in stomach acid release. And the gut is controlled by the central nervous system and spinal cord. So this is an important connection to stress because stress induces a physiological response of fight or flight in the central nervous system. And as we explored in the lecture, stress releases this hormone called cortisol or glucocorticoid. Glucocorticoid can, when exposed to long term at least, it can cause a whole array of problems such as diabetes, high blood pressure, weakened immune system, among others. It can also affect the digestive system by causing your esophagus to go into spasms, increasing the acid in your stomach, which results in indigestion, making you feel nauseous, giving you diarrhea or constipation. Important thing to consider here is that the gut health is controlled in great part by the central nervous system and spinal cord. And when stress induces the fight or flight response, glucocorticoid is released, causing a lot of effects. But one of them is the increase in stomach acid, which, as we know, it worsens the symptoms of ulcers. So, evidence behind the effects of mood disorders. There have been various studies that do make a connection between mood disorders and the gastrointestinal health that relates to ulcers. So I focused on 3 studies. One of them looked at the anxiety and depression in patients with gastroesophageal reflux disease, and which also leads to ulcers, by the way, and their effects on the quality of life. It did make a connection. Gastroesophageal reflux disease is also related to symptoms, and it's associated with mood and anxiety and psychological symptomology. Gastroesophageal reflux disease is associated with anxiety, according to a 3rd study done in 2017. So really, there's been a lot of studies that make a clear connection between the two. However, one thing that I noticed is that they all kind of agree that ulcers aren't directly caused by mood disorders. It just makes a connection or a correlation. And as we've learned, correlation doesn't equal causation, but it can equal that it worsens symptoms, really. Talked about stress affecting the microbiome and the health, but do other psychological disorders affect it as well? So, other mood disorders that cause stress is depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD. But there's really not been much research that clearly distinguishes the difference between mood disorders, effects on microbiome, and stress. But a lot of these things do cause stress. So it's a lot of indirect causes for digestive and microbiome changes. In conclusion, H. pylori is a bacterial infection that is the cause of stomach ulcers, but it's more complicated than that. 50% of the population have, oh, that's a typo, it's not supposed to be stomach ulcers, but 50% of the population has H. pylori. However, not 50% of the population has stomach ulcers. So this suggests that there's other factors that have been unexplored, and there's no research to suggest a clear list of factors that trigger the infection. So the symptoms get worse with the release of stomach acid. And stomach acid is mostly released when there's a stress situation. And that is by the release of glucocorticoid in a fight or flight response. So there's many things that cause this prolonged stress, but mainly there's mood disorders such as depression, anxiety, PTSD, among others, that cause this ongoing stress. So the conclusion that I want to leave you with today is that there's no clear pathway between mood disorders and stress to gut health. Also, here are my sources.